Ukraine is targeting the source of Russia's air power with what a security source is calling the biggest attack on Russian airfields since the war began.
Elements of what the Ukrainians are doing, which indicate that they, at the very least, want to stay long enough for this to make a difference.
On the battlefield, dominating the skies is the key to victory. But to achieve this superiority, it is essential to be able to protect air bases. This is precisely why military airfields are being hit the hardest in the Russian-Ukrainian war. Ukraine continues to launch strategic attacks to weaken air power, one of the most critical elements of the Russian war machine. The latest attack, which came one step closer to Moscow's defense line, was carried out at the military airport in Kaluga. While the drones exploding in the darkness of the night paralyzed air operations in the region, the impact of this attack on Russia's war capacity is a matter of great curiosity. Is this operation part of Ukraine's long-term strategy? Will Russia's increasingly vulnerable air bases continue to be the target of new attacks? For answers to these questions and more, our video begins. But first, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel, turn on notifications, and give us a like to stay informed. Ukraine struck Shaikovka in the Kaluga region, 200 kilometers from the border. This is the home of the 52nd Heavy Bomber Aviation Regiment. It is known that Tu-22M3 strategists are stationed at this airfield. Russian sources reported that the attack was carried out with unmanned aerial vehicles. A total of 24 drones were used in the attack. Russian news channels claimed that all drones were detected and shot down in time. No casualties or injuries were reported as a result of the attack. Russian sources also claimed that there was no damage to infrastructure. The Ukrainian intelligence spokesperson commented on the recent attacks on Russian airports. The spokesperson officially announced that the attacks were planned and carried out by Ukrainian intelligence. The spokesperson hinted that a large number of Russian airplanes may have been seriously damaged. The spokesperson claimed that these planes were Russian strategic bombers Tu-22M3, which the Russians have consistently used to launch missile attacks on Ukraine. The drone's incendiary fire may have damaged the Russian planes. If Russian planes were damaged in this attack, it would soon become the second major destructive attack on Ukraine. In late March, Ukrainian forces destroyed 4 Russian helicopters, dealing a heavy blow to the Russian air fleet. At that time, Ukrainian special forces launched an attack with HIMARS systems on a Russian airbase behind the lines in the Belgorod region. This airbase was equipped with Ka-52 and Mi-8 helicopters, as well as a large amount of military equipment. 2 Ka-52 Hokum attack helicopters and 2 Mi-8 HIP transport helicopters were destroyed in the attack. Until now, Ukrainian HIMARS teams have generally relied on longer-range ATAK-EMS missiles to destroy Russian rotorcraft aviation on full-time helipads or intercept them while landing in close frontline landing-receiving zones. The only reason why such GMLRS strikes on Russian helicopter advanced airfields usually do not occur is that Russian forces know very well the attack range of Ukrainian artillery and hide their assets out of their reach. This time, however, the Russians disregarded security measures and deployed an airfield in a dangerous area. Perhaps someone in the Russian military command may have actually believed their own propaganda story that the US had even remotely denied Ukraine authorization to use HIMARS. No less important here was the meticulous timing of Ukrainian special and intelligence forces. The window of opportunity for such an attack is very short, because helicopters only stop at these installations for a short time. This time is mostly used for refueling and rearmament. The reaction time is therefore limited. Ukraine has managed to use this short window to its advantage. The helicopters were hit by M130A2 guided multiple launch rocket system alternate warheads, each containing a 200-pound warhead with 180,000 tungsten fragments. The Ukrainian Special Operations Forces reported detecting the helicopters at a forward arming and refueling point used for rapid movement of aircraft or sudden attacks on the Ukrainian security and defense forces. They then launched the attack using GMLRS-AW guided rockets. A video released by the SSO shows explosions on the ground from 4 helicopters and guided rockets. While one frame shows what appears to be a direct hit, the large number of fragments contained in the warheads would probably blow a helicopter to pieces even if it landed close to the target. However, the aim of such Ukrainian attacks is not always to destroy specific buildings or pieces of equipment. The goal is to steadily increase the cost of war for Russia by instilling fear, increasing risk, and disrupting operations. This strategy is working. As Ukraine increases its use of deep strike munitions, the Russians are moving their forces further away from the front lines. Just 10 months ago, the Russian Air Force deployed 305 fighter jets just 160 kilometers from the front line in Ukraine. When the Ukrainian army began launching Attack-MS, each of which scattered hundreds of grenade-sized munitions over a wide area, the Russians panicked and began withdrawing most of their fighter jets. Russian authorities redeployed them to bases just beyond the range of the Attack-MS. This evacuation may have prevented valuable Russian aircraft from being destroyed in the latest drone attack, but it should not be inferred that Ukraine's attacks on Russian airfields are meaningless. The raids forced the Russians into a time-distance dilemma. Operating from bases not just 100 miles from the front line, but 400 miles away, limits how often Russian warplanes can fly in a given week, and also limits how long they can stay over the front line during their less frequent sorties. Of course, the Russian Air Force protects its aircraft, but in doing so it makes them less useful. This is good math for Ukraine. It will only get better as Ukrainian ammunition penetrates deeper and more frequently into Russia. But in response to the growing threat of Ukrainian drone attacks, Russian air-based defences have been significantly increased. The Russians are increasingly actively building fortifications and other additional elements to protect their aircraft, especially from attacks by long-range attack drones. Hardened bunkers have been observed around airfields. Another structure of unclear purpose, but which appears to be hardened, is seen being built in a separate part of the base. Additional lattice work for less well-protected soft shelters can also be seen in an open apron in the centre of the base and opposite the other structure being built. Interestingly, from the beginning of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Russian military analysts and bloggers have voiced criticism of the vulnerability of warplanes operating unprotected at Russian airfields. Critical airfields were not equipped with protective structures, nor did Russia have such hardened aircraft shelters suitable for flanker series aircraft. While the bombers operated by Russia's long-range aviation branch were moved to safer bases deeper inside Russia, the tactical Su-24, Su-25, Su-30SM M2, Su-34 and Su-35S aircraft remained mainly at their operational bases. However, every few months they were moved to other airfields in the operational area and sometimes even further away from the front line. Anti-aircraft defences were installed on the edges of the airfields. Dropped aircraft were arranged as decoys, and temporary blast walls were built to protect against shrapnel and other fragments. More unusual measures included placing car tyres on the top surfaces of aircraft and painting silhouettes of aircraft on concrete airfield surfaces. The tyres were specifically designed to confuse image-matching seekers on Ukrainian missiles, such as the Storm Shadow air-launched cruise missiles supplied by Britain and the nearly identical Scalp EGs from France. Overall, this mix of countermeasures against Ukrainian long-range attacks was largely ineffective. After all, it did not include sufficient hardened aircraft shelters. With each successful Ukrainian airstrike, it became harder and harder to ignore the bewildered comments and brutal assessments in the Russian military information space. A program for airfields has been drawn up and shelters will definitely be built, the Russian Defense Ministry assured in an interview in July of this year. Obviously, such a project would be extremely expensive. Moreover, since Russia launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine, followed by harsh economic sanctions, the Russian economy has undoubtedly been under pressure. Problems are piling up, and Russia appears to be experiencing a gradual economic decline. Russia's economic performance over the past 4 years can be summarized by looking at key indicators. While there are doubts about the accuracy of some official Russian statistics, they nevertheless provide a fair picture of the overall situation. Despite the war and sanctions, the Russian economy has proven to be robust. Growth has largely been driven by sharp budgetary spending not only on the military, but also on infrastructure projects. These projects include investments to improve transport links with China, greater economic self-government by producing goods previously imported from the West, and tackling some of Russia's social problems, above all the low birth rate. The government is increasing maternity benefits in 2025, with first-time mothers to receive 677,000 rubles. This is up from 630,400 rubles in 2024. Vladimir Putin's spokesman, Dmitry Peskov, said that ensuring that Russians have as many children as possible is the main goal of our state policy. However, the projected 2.5% growth in GDP for 2025 is probably overly optimistic. Problems have increased in recent months. The Russian economy has overheated, fueled by budget financing and generous credit, leading to an inflation of at least 10%. Increased military production, mobilization of personnel for the armed forces, and significant outmigration have led to an acute shortage of labor. The year-end unemployment rate was only 2.3% compared to 4.5% before the war. To attract labor and new recruits, wages and payments to military contract signatories were rapidly increased. The Russian central bank raised the interest rate from 16% in December 2023 to 21% in October 2024 and stayed there. It is these developments that have triggered claims that the Russian economy is heading for disaster. But Russia has had high interest rates before, 19% in 1998 and 13.1% in 2009, and inflation fell rapidly in both cases. There are signs that the economy is now starting to cool. Business is beginning to feel the impact of high interest rates. The government is selectively reducing the volume of loans provided on generous terms, and firms are taking measures to improve efficiency. The Russian ruble is appreciating, and the inflation rate and interest rates should start to fall later in the year. In January 2025, the unemployment rate began to rise, albeit slightly, to 2.4%. One challenge is the labour shortage, which is pushing up nominal wages and contributing to inflation. This shortage has been exacerbated by the emigration of a significant number of young skilled workers fleeing military service, and the conscription or contract labour of around 500,000 men since 2022. In the past year, average wage growth has remained around 20%. On November 25, 2024, the Russian Duma approved the 2025 budget, with total spending estimated at 41.5 trillion rubles. This represents an increase of about 5% compared to 2024. Most of the additional funds are earmarked for war and security-related sectors. It is worth noting that the final distribution and allocation of funds may change in 2025, reflecting possible adjustments and increases during the year. In 2025, defence spending is projected to reach a record high, 6.3% of Russia's GDP. Officially, this represents 33% of the federal budget. But if hidden spending in other departments or services is taken into account, the total can be estimated at 43% of the budget. The significant increase, despite initial reduction plans, can be attributed to overly optimistic budget assumptions for 2024, which were not taken into account due to the unbroken Ukrainian defence. The deficit is planned to be financed from within, with state banks buying government bonds. Sanctions have significantly affected the Russian arms industry, OPK, raising costs, increasing dependence on allies and affecting the quality of the equipment supplied. Maintaining production at current levels is not sustainable in the medium term. While sanctions have significantly affected the Russian economy, it has proven to be resilient and has found ways to overcome some of them. In the long and medium term, sanctions have destabilized the economy and permanently damaged innovation capabilities, which are vital for sustainable economic growth. As a result, Russian industry has been forced to produce adequate but not good equipment, and the scale of losses on the front line could lead to unsustainable replenishment of resources. The supply shortage has reached a point where even the Mosfilm film studio has donated T-55 and PT-76 tanks for use by the Russian army. While sanctions have not completely halted Russian imports, they have significantly increased the cost of imported materials and goods. While microelectronics supply chains have shifted to China and Kazakhstan, the cost has been significantly higher. Russia has increasingly focused on repairing vehicles or refurbishing and modernizing those stored in post-Soviet warehouses. These challenges are particularly evident in Russian aviation. For example, Russia has suspended production of the fifth-generation Su-57 fighter jet due to technological shortcomings caused by sanctions. Russia is prioritizing the production of infantry fighting vehicles, armored personnel carriers, artillery, and UAVs due to shortcomings in its ability to deliver modern equipment to the front line. From February 2022 to November 2024, about 20% of IFV losses were compensated by current production, about 65% came from long-term storage depots, and about 15% of losses were not compensated. Russian military operations are often limited by equipment losses. According to Western estimates, Russia is able to produce 125 tanks per month, most of which are replenished from old equipment in storage. Production of modern T-90 type tanks is limited to about 15 per month. As a result, older T-55s and T-62s are deployed for infantry attacks. However, the capabilities of the Russian army have improved significantly in areas such as reconnaissance, intelligence, electronic warfare, and the use of drones. There is a clear tendency to prioritize quantity over quality. This has led to increased production of vehicles such as the T-72B3M, BWP-3, and BTR-82, instead of the T-14 Armata, Kurganets-25, and Boomerang. Due to serious shortages in the supply of advanced optics, the Russian army has adapted the T-80BVM tanks to the 1G42 configuration, usually seen on older models. The situation is similar with the T-72B3M and the Sosna U system replaced by the 1PN-6MT02. These trends are evident in all areas where the scarcity of advanced components from the West has forced Russia to return to older systems, some of which date back to the Soviet era. Kazakhstan has become an important intermediary partner in supplying semiconductors and other microelectronics to Russia. From February 2022 to February 2024, exports of these goods to Russia increased by an average of 567%. A significant portion of these goods are going to Kazakhstan from the European Union and the United Kingdom. Significant support for Russia's war effort also comes from China, especially in the form of anti-drone systems. However, both Russia and China have rejected such deals. In addition, Iran has provided significant assistance by delivering Shahed 131 and 136 cruise missiles and ballistic missiles. North Korea has also supported the Russian Federation by supplying 6 million artillery shells and 5 Hwasong-11 missiles since the beginning of the war. According to Ukrainian military intelligence, Russia is capable of producing about 30 kilobanin Tom-1 and 20 caliber missiles per month. The ability to produce advanced cruise missiles suggests that Moscow has found ways to import cutting-edge technology and circumvent sanctions. However, there are signs that Moscow's stockpile of long-range cruise munitions is dwindling, which could limit its ability to launch frequent strikes on Ukraine's critical infrastructure. One of the key indicators of the military's offensive capabilities is the average daily number of shells fired during high-intensity battles. Russian artillery is responsible for inflicting 70% of Ukraine's frontline personnel casualties. The maximum number of shells fired averaged 38,000 per day in June 2022. Since then, the daily volume has fluctuated between 7,000 and 16,000, averaging about 10,000 rounds per day for the rest of the conflict. By the end of 2023, Russia had successfully increased the capacity of its munitions factories. Excluding ammunition support from North Korea, Iran, and Belarus, Russia is estimated to be able to produce 1,225 million 158 mm caliber shells and 800,000 128 mm caliber shells in 2024. The recruitment of volunteers has improved the situation on the front line, but replenishing equipment at the same rate remains a significant challenge. By March 2024, The Russian army has managed to maintain a balance with its losses. Ukrainian intelligence estimates that thanks to covert mobilization, Russia is able to recruit between 30,000 and 37,000 soldiers per month. Russian figures, on the other hand, report around 40,000, which is not significantly different. This allows Russia to fully compensate for its losses, which average 37,000 troops per month, according to data up to June 2024. Ukrainian estimates show that most troops are sent directly to the front line to make up for losses. Despite the establishment of a large number of new recruitment centres, a significant problem of insufficient recruitment remains, and many centres lack resources to properly train soldiers, leading to inadequate readiness. In military aviation, pilots who previously flew transport aircraft are being retrained for attack aircraft, which significantly reduces the quality of the crews and their ability to perform specific combat missions. In short, the mounting problems suggest that Russia has a declining economic order. Over time, these pressures could force a Russian president to seek better relations with the West. Thank you for watching,